Hey, good morning, folks. This is Stan Scrabbit from Jamestown Community College, and today we are going to talk about how you can improve your PowerPoint presentations. So, first of all, let's kind of get started with a little housekeeping. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, the one that you're viewing, there's a Q&A button there. And with that Q&A button, feel free to submit any questions that you may have. And what else? This presentation is Twitter friendly, so if you have any, if you're out there on Twitter, feel free to send a note. I can be reached at JCC DTEI. And also, my presentation is, well, I'm using PowerPoint, and it can be found on slideshare.net/Scrabbit. So feel free to check it out. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so this presentation is all about trying to improve your presentation. Why would we want to even bother going ahead and doing that? Well, first of all, every day somebody's out there giving a bad PowerPoint presentation. You've seen them, I've seen them. If you go to conferences, you've been in class, there is a PowerPoint presentation that truly hurts you. And with this PowerPoint presentation, that you can seriously cause some damage. So hold on one second. Speaking of presentations, I think I need to mute somebody. So, all right, that sounds a little better. I was getting a little ringing in my ear. I forgot to mute myself on my other computer. So, but anyways, given bad PowerPoint presentations, they say bullets, PowerPoints, can kill. Death by PowerPoint, it's true. With the number of bullets that people put onto the presentations, you can seriously do damage to another person. So why are you here? You may be regularly giving PowerPoint presentations. You're looking for ways to improve your presentations. That's probably why you're here. But I think it really comes down to you go through all this time and energy, and you want people to remember or retain what you're sharing with them. And what we're finding out is that's not necessarily happening. And it really comes down to how you're building your presentations. So what we want to do is create a presentation that is memorable, that people will remember. You want to give a good presentation, so you're not wasting their time, you're not wasting your time, everybody is benefiting, and that's the goal, how to give a more memorable presentation. So we're going to break this down into really 3 parts. We're going to look about the science behind it, why currently our presentations are not as memorable as they should be, how to go about building a presentation that is more memorable, and then finally how to deliver that presentation. So let's start off with the science. Okay. So why is this method better than the methods that we typically use? Well, I think it starts out with Microsoft. When Microsoft goes ahead and puts out this tool, PowerPoint, it defaults to the bullet mode. So everybody thinks, well, that's the right way to do it. That's the way that I need to go ahead and put my slides together, is put these bullets there. Okay. Furthest thing from the truth. Okay. In order to help somebody remember the presentation that you're giving, you really have to start with understanding how their mind works. And this is really, kind of wrapped around this idea of memory. Our brain is tremendously powerful. It does a lot of processing, but it also has its limitations. So let's talk about those. So the goal here is I have a PowerPoint deck of slides that I am going to go through, and I want you to be able to remember, you know, what I'm presenting on the other end. And so in order to do that, we have to take in consideration how the mind works and build our PowerPoint to kind of address that. So when we're building this deck, one of four things are happening, okay? And I can only show three, unfortunately, but basically what you're doing is I'm transmitting a whole deck of information. And on the other side, what typically happens is somebody gets absolutely nothing from the presentation. They can't remember a thing. They may only get bits and pieces of that presentation, that they remember a smattering here and a smattering there. Ideal world is that they remember everything, you know, and they can piece it all together in a nice series like you intended it. Or the case that I was not able to present here, and is where they walk out knowing less about the topic than they walked into the presentation. That you have totally confused them based on how you put your presentation together. So that's worst case scenario. But typically they're only getting bits and pieces, or they're only they're not getting anything from the presentation. So we have our mind, you know, our senses are tremendously powerful. You know, using our eyes, for example, we're bringing in all this data all at once, and you know, we end up filtering out a lot through our working memory of all this data, but we do a great job of processing this information with our sense of touch and taste and smell and hearing and sight. We can process an amazing amount of information. The long-term memory is also tremendously powerful, that we can, if properly stored, you know, and a little repetition tossed in, we can remember things for a tremendous amount of time. Where the problem lies is this working memory. It's limited in the fact that it only works with 3 to 4 bits of information at a time, and when we do not treat it properly, we get, you know, a cognitive overload, and that is typically what's happening, you know, with individuals that are watching our presentation, whether they be students or audience members at a conference, is typically, you know, we're getting into cognitive overload because we did not attend to their needs, especially in this area of working memory. And as a result, they end up being overwhelmed. If you go to a conference, at the end of the day, if there's a lot of information to process, you're exhausted at the end of the day. And often it's because we're asking our audience to do more than they really need to in order to learn our material, to get to process that material and retain it. We're asking them to do more work than they need to. And this is where it really just kind of it starts. First of all, you have 2 channels. And, well, I mean, you have multiple channels, but these are the 2 that I'm going to focus on. Is your visual channel and your verbal channel. Okay, they work in tandem. They're parallel processing. They're very powerful in what they do, but you have to treat them. You have to treat them respectfully, and often we don't. And I'm going to explain why. But let's talk about the visual channel first. The visual channel is great at processing images, photos, charts, graphs. You can remember imagery long after that you've moved on. You know, if someone is giving you directions in an area that you are familiar, many people start processing this as images in their head to be able to navigate to where they need to go. But if you think about the power of imagery, Ken Burns, he does a great job with documentaries, for example. You will find very few written words in a Ken Burns documentary, right? He uses the verbal channel with a great narration, but he also uses the visual channel and putting up imagery and such, okay? So why aren't we doing the same thing in our presentations? You know, and that's probably the big question. When I worked out with the Air Force, you know, I'd be traveling out to the missile field, and I'd be riding with my team, which was five other guys or gals. And as we were driving out, and it was typically an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from one location to another, you know, they would be talking about the movie, and they could recreate that movie in the vehicle just talking about it, and they were pulling up this imagery in their head and explaining this movie back to us in the vehicle. And I found this absolutely amazing, because I could not get them to memorize the material that was required as part of the job, but yet they could see a movie once and regurgitate it and spit it back out to me, which was very fascinating, and I started understanding how powerful this visual channel was. Oh, let me go back to that visual channel. There was a couple of experiments that were done which I thought were interesting. They brought these individuals in, and they had them, you know, this group, they brought this group in, had them look at about 100 different images, and then they conducted some little experiment and test and sent them on their way. About a year later, they brought these individuals back in, and this time they showed them 1,000 images, and intermixed in this 1,000 images randomly were images that they had seen the year prior, and with great accuracy they were able to re-identify those images, pick them out of that 1,000 batch, which, you know, the power to be able to remember that, you know, is pretty fascinating. So, you know, one of the keys is we need to make sure that we're doing a better job with imagery. The narration channel is where we process, you know, the verbal. This is when you're up there giving your presentation, just like I am right now, talking about this idea, and basically on the verbal channel, everything is getting processed really well. That we can, I was just reading an article earlier today that they were talking about a comparison where you looked at a slide with bullet points with someone narrating compared to no slide and somebody just speaking and narrating, and the cognitive overload with the slide with bullets was higher than without that slide, and it affected the results in, you know, their exams. But then they also, you know, they did this with imagery, and they found out that having good narration with good imagery, you know, kind of outperformed both of them. So I thought that was interesting. But this narration, if done properly, is also a very powerful piece, and it cannot be neglected. You can't just, you know, there has to be a balance in everything. Which brings me up to this. I was a bullet point king. I could write bullet points like no one's business. And basically I was hurting a lot of people, you know, that I would give these presentations, and I come to realize that no one was benefiting from these presentations. And then I picked up this book by Cliff Atkinson on what was called Beyond Bullet Points. And I've used that method ever since, and every presentation using PowerPoint has now been very visual and certainly less bullet points. And the reason there's a problem here, and you can look at these bullet points here, and as I'm talking to you, you can read these bullet points if you want. And what's happening is, by you reading these bullet points and my narration, you are reading the bullet point and you're verbalizing it in your head. And as you verbalize it in your head, then there's a collision. There's a collision with what you're reading and what I'm saying. And as a result, it's a tremendous amount of overwork, and nobody's getting anything out of it. So there's ways that we can improve upon this. The goal in what we're trying to do is guide your viewers' attention. Okay? So what we're trying to do is one idea per slide. You don't have to put 8 bullet points onto a slide. You can take each of those bullet points and put them on their own slide and speak individually to that particular idea and focus on that idea. And what it does is it reduces the amount of processing that the working memory has to do. Because when you're looking at a slide with bullet points, even though you introduce a new bullet point, individuals will quickly read that bullet point. But then, because we've trained them so well since elementary school, they'll start at the top and kind of read through everything else. But yet you're speaking, and you're speaking about that one bullet point, and there's a collision. So by spreading out these bullet points onto different slides, you can focus on those individual ideas. The other thing that is kind of fascinating with bullet points is we like to fragment sentences. That will give them the beginning of a sentence, or the end of a sentence, or the middle of the sentence. Well, the human mind loves puzzles. And as soon as you put something that is not complete, we are trying to complete it. So we're trying to figure out what the rest of the sentence is. Even though you're going to tell them, they're going out and starting to process this puzzle. So one of the ways that you can prevent this from happening is just give them the complete sentence and take the mystery out of it. And this reduces the amount of cognitive overload for that individual. And ideally, trying to find a graphic that kind of ties everything together, that emphasizes that point. There are a lot of great graphics out there. Creative Commons licensing is really important. You can do a search on Google. You can do a search in Flickr. Many of these sites use Creative Commons. And Creative Commons, basically the copyright holder has given you permission to use that particular image. As long as you typically give credit for it, you're in good shape. So, but you're looking for an image that pulls everything together, that can emphasize and stress that point. Excuse me. So let's talk about building the deck. So we looked at the science, why it's important, so we can prevent cognitive overload. You know, so looking at that science, now let's talk about how to go about building this deck. Okay. So the first step is don't go anywhere near PowerPoint. Okay. And instead go to like Microsoft Word and build an outline. So this tool came from Cliff Atkinson, and what it does is it kind of sets the stage and creates a template for building your PowerPoint presentation. The nice thing about this is there's individual blocks. So if I fill out all the blocks, I will be able to give a presentation that lasts about 45 minutes. And that's if I give the key points, the explanation, and detailed parts of this presentation. If I fill out all the blocks, that's it. That's all the information that I really need to provide. And a lot of folks, you know, if you're building in PowerPoint, it's very easy to just, oh, let me just build a new slide. Let me just build a new slide. And you're just kind of overloading what you need to do. And you end up with these PowerPoint decks that are tremendously huge, and you're trying to get through it because you got 8 bullets on each slide, and there's no way you're going to do it. But this method allows you to really time everything and keep it to, you know, pretty much your scheduled time for the presentation. But it also attends to the needs of the viewer by giving him one idea at a time and controlling the key points, and I think it does a great job. So whenever I'm building a presentation, this is the tool that I use. So let's talk about the parts of the tool. So the first part of the tool is setting the stage, really tying into your audience and explaining, you know, getting them involved, and it's really looking at it from their perspective. So if you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I said, you know, every day there's somebody giving truly a bad PowerPoint presentation. And then I pulled it into you. What's your role here? Well, you're the one who also gives presentation, and you may be using PowerPoint. What challenge do you face? You regularly give presentations, you're concerned that the information is not being retained. What do you want to do? You want to give better PowerPoint presentations or better presentations. And so then it's, what's the call to action? Let me show you how to do that. So that's my role in this piece. So from there, it gets into Act 2. And Act 2 basically is you got key points. So in this presentation, there's 3 key points. The first one is why using this method will make your presentation more memorable. And from there, there's 3 explanation points. So if I just use the key points and just talk to those, this whole presentation would only last 5 minutes. By adding the explanation points, I've now increased this to 15 minutes and give the audience just a little more information. Okay, so we talked about making it more memorable, is understanding the limits of working memory, the visual and verbal channel, and being able to guide the users, how to guide them through the presentation. And then we have the details. So typically 3 details per explanation. And with this will turn out to be a 45-minute presentation. And if you look, you know, if you were paying attention to my slides, so like my key points, let me back up a couple slides. And one more. This is a key point. And the way that I've set up my slide, that this slide, all the key points are built in this vertical manner, where my explanation slides are built on a blue background and all my detailed slides are on a white background. And so now this is that third point for that explanation slide. So let me show you how I go about actually converting to a PowerPoint presentation. So like I said, I build my presentation first. I don't go anywhere near PowerPoint. I build it in this template. Then I take the results of that and move it over to PowerPoint. And let me show you how I do that. So I am going to share my screen. Maybe. Very good. And so this is a presentation that, this is the actual Word document that I use for my presentation. And as we look through this document, you can see every bit, every block is filled out, and I have all this information. Okay. So what I do is I basically select the whole document, Control A, and it highlights that whole document, and then I copy that information. So I'm going to copy it. And from there, I build a new document. And I'm going to select a blank document. And what I want to do is I want to paste and paste special. So I would select paste, paste special, and do unformatted text. And what this does is this takes each of those items and places it on the sheet, basically one line at a time. And so then I would remove, the things that are not necessary in this presentation. The setting, where am I, and just kind of remove all that and clean up this document. And once that document's cleaned up, I will save it and then go ahead and close Microsoft Word. So I have a document that's all cleaned up, so I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm going to go ahead and close this particular document. Maybe. Talking about memory issues, this is what I'm suffering from. Okay, so the next piece is now I go into PowerPoint. So I'm going to go ahead and open PowerPoint. And we'll give it a second as it's opening. And I have, so on the Word document, because I was creating presentations quite often, I was removing the same information and doing a little formatting. So I actually created a macro that did this all for me, automated that whole process. So let me open a template from my computer. And I have a template that I'm using. And what I want to do now is I want to add new slides. Oh, and the reason this is a template is because the layout, I have those different colors for setting up my presentation, and that way I can lay out my slides. So I'm going to open up this a new slide, and at the bottom of the new slide it says slides from outline, and that's kind of important. So I'm going to select slides from outline, and I am going to go to my most recent downloads and select this document called Improving Your PowerPoint Presentation. And so because everything was on its own individual line, it's going to come in and create a new slide for each of those lines. So this is my whole presentation. So now I would go in there and do some editing and tweaking to those different slides, and try to get basically everything on 2 lines and make it look nice. But also, let me go back to the slide sorter, is I can look at why using this method would make a more memorable presentation. That was one of my key slides. And so what I want to do is I want to make sure that that's going to look in that format. And so this one happens to be one of those explanation slides, and so I'm going to make it look like that. And I'll go through my whole slide deck and look at the processing of verbal, and that's another explanation slide. And then also building the slide deck, that's an explanation slide. And so, no wait, actually that is, but this happens to be a key point. And so we'll make it there. And so I would go through my whole slide deck and identify what my key slides were, my explanation slides, and go through the whole deck to identify those. And so that's really the step to go from Microsoft Word, convert it over to PowerPoint. So you're gonna take your template, you're gonna go ahead and put everything on one line, by pasting as unformatted text, and then you're gonna pull that into PowerPoint from new slides from an outline, and that'll build your PowerPoint presentation. So those are basically the steps for going ahead and creating, getting started in the PowerPoint presentation. So once I have my PowerPoint presentation, the next thing I do is focus on what my narration is, what my script is. And I use the notes section in PowerPoint to add those notes. And this is because typically folks want to put all this information on the slide because they're going to talk about it later. Not a good thing. Put it into the notes. You can put a lot more information into the notes and keep your slide as simple as possible. So the notes is your verbal channel. This is your script. This is the information that you are going to talk about in your presentation. And PowerPoint is not a great way to pass on information to someone else. If you're going to give a handout, PowerPoint is not the handout you really want to be giving. Create a proper handout, give that out, and use PowerPoint to do exactly what it's designed for, and that's to help deliver your presentation and provide visual support for what you're doing. So this is really the script. You can use PowerPoint. I would recommend very much against it. If you were going to create a handout of this information, create a proper handout. Don't use PowerPoint to do it, although you can. If you can't, if you're going to do it, you can provide them with all that notes information. The other piece about the notes section is that when you're using PowerPoint in a presenter mode, then you could have that information available to you to refer to as necessary as you're giving your presentation. In the presenter mode, you're going to basically be shown the screen you're on, and just to the right of it you'll have the text that's in your notes, and then on the bottom you can see what particular slide is coming up and how long that you're into that presentation, and so you know what's coming up next. No surprises. And then the last piece to building your PowerPoint presentation is finding the right images. And as I mentioned, there's some great images on Creative Commons. Just doing a Creative Commons search. You can do this in doing a Google image search. There's an option for dealing with licensing. And then also in Flickr. Flickr is more straightforward. They tell you it's a Creative Commons search. And then there's also in Creative Commons itself media outlets for video, for audio, for imagery. that you can use in your presentations. So, you know, do it properly. Don't be pulling stuff that's copyrighted and not getting the you know, the rights to use it. According to Cliff Atkinson, probably his recommended way of doing this is sitting down with a stubby pencil and having all your slides out in front of you. And I usually print them off, and I actually do this. I'll print off my slide deck with 2 slide images, 2 to 4 slide images per page, and I will start looking for images. And you know, where I worked, we had a stock photo library that I could access, and so I'd go in and capture the numbers and get the stock photos for those particular images. But what Cliff Atkinson recommends is sitting down with a stubby pencil and just kind of drawing out what you're intending to see, and that'll help you narrow down what you're looking for in building your slide deck. As I mentioned before, you're trying to pull things together. If you can find a theme that goes across all your slides, that is great. I am not good at that, and you know, it's something that I struggle with, but something that I have in the back of my head on, you know, being able to do, and so I try to do that, but I'm not very good at it. But ideally, if you know, if you can pull something together for that slide and find that image that's just going to stand out, you're going to make your presentation more powerful. And that's what your sketches are for. Your sketches, you know, are helping you find that key image, that something that will just jump out, and that will help people map it to their brain, your presentation, so they can remember this. This particular presentation, I've given it for the past, I don't know, 6 years, and you know, I've given it at different occasions, conferences, to different universities, and I've had people come up and talk to me about the presentation years after, and you know, they were still able to remember, you know, the key points of the presentation. So I think it speaks loudly to, you know, how it was, you know, being able to that folks were processing it and being able to remember it. All right, so far we talked about, you know, the science, you know, what's going on in your head, and to remember a presentation. Talked about how I go about building these presentations, from starting with a Word document, moving it over to PowerPoint, adding my scripts, then adding my images. Now let's talk about how to deliver this. So the first piece is, do not separate yourself from your presentation. Try to stay as close to your presentation as possible, because what you're trying to do is you are part of that presentation. So step into the screen. And if you noticed, if I was to present this on a big screen, all the important text is above me. And so I'm not blocking any text. I'm getting in front of maybe the image, but it keeps their attention in one spot. I'm reducing the amount of energy they have to exert in order to watch the presentation. So stay in front of your presentation. What you're trying not to do is split screen. And so, you know, as I look at JCC and the various computer setups, unfortunately, there's that split screen, you know, that you're splitting attention, where they're looking at the instructor and then back up to the slide and back to the instructor and back to the slide. And, you know, that is something, if you can reduce that, that would be key, you know, to delivering a better presentation. Getting your computer out in front of you. I have a long cable in my computer bag that that long cable, what I do is I hook it up to, sorry about that. And I didn't pay attention to my remove distractions. My fault. Sorry. But I keep the computer in front of me, so I have this long cable that I will hook into the projector and set that computer out in front of me, so I can just kind of glance at it and know where I'm at as far as part of that presentation. Remote control. This is something else that I have in my bag. When I go out to give a presentation, I have my own remote. Probably the best $40 purchase that I ever made. And I plug that into the computer, and I can have access and control to be able to control the changing of the slides to and from. And that way I'm not relying on somebody else, that I'm not walking back and forth, to turn off, turn on or turn off, or change slides by walking back and forth to the computer. I'm not telling somebody else, go to the next slide and change that. So I'm actually in control of my presentation, and I can control as we walk through this. Try to remove as many distractions as possible. Make your presentation, as transparent as possible. So as you can tell, I obviously missed something. I wasn't running my checklist, and so therefore I left my phone on, and that just kind of disrupted the whole presentation. And so you're trying to reduce those things as much as possible. Trying to come in ahead of time, make sure that all the technology works to the best of your ability. Other ways of controlling, or keeping the program transparent is to reduce all the bells and whistles as much as possible. That, I've watched presentations where you've got slides that are coming in and spinning in, and bullet points that are zooming in from all these directions. That is a distraction, right? If you look at movies, when they're going from one scene to another, it is typically what's called a straight cut, and they just cut to the next scene. They don't do any, unless you're watching the old Batman series, they don't do a lot of spinning and fading and all these kind of things. But yeah, we weave these into our presentations. Simply because Microsoft made it possible doesn't mean that we should use it. So try to keep everything as simple as possible. And that's the same thing in building your slides, keeping your slides as simple as possible. As folks in academia, we have all these data points, right? But yeah, we're just focusing on this one data point. Well, focus on that. Get rid of all those other information and just keep it as simple as possible, right? This will help, help with the cognitive overload. The more stuff you put on your slide, the more folks are trying to figure out what it is, and it's not helping get your message across. Come in early, make sure everything's working. I came in at quarter till the hour, made sure that my presentation was ready, and made sure that things were set up as I needed to help try to make this as transparent as possible. Okay. Plan for any problems that may develop. Typically, if I'm out giving a presentation, I have a backup computer, I have my slides on a flash drive, I also have them up on the cloud so I can access them. And it's possible that I could actually give this presentation with my phone. It would be really small and intimate presentation, but I could still do that. So think about the problems that may develop and figure out ways that you can work around those. You're in charge of your presentation. You're in charge of controlling the flow of your presentation. And one way to get there is practice, practice, practice. And if you look at this presentation, I am very familiar with what's in this presentation. One, because I built it. So it starts from that Word document. I know where all the pieces are, what things that I want to talk about. And then as I move it over to the PowerPoint, by cleaning it up, I'm reviewing it, seeing if it flows the way I want it to, identifying all my key slides and explanation slides. And then as I add the script, I'm seeing this presentation again. And as I add the images, I'm seeing it again. And then I'm going through and making sure everything looks right and works right. So all in all, but before I even try this presentation for its first time, I've probably gone through it 7 times, just getting everything right. And so I'm very familiar with what's in this presentation. So there's no mysteries. But I've watched folks put together a presentation and they just kind of whip through it, and that's the one and done. They've seen it, they have no idea what's in there, and so slides kind of surprise them. They talk about things, that they're going to talk about 5 slides in, and they're just not familiar with what's going on. So if you take this time, in preparing your presentation, from making sure you have all the right information, that you have good imagery, you will end up giving a presentation that people will remember. When folks are looking at your presentation, they're going to follow this kind of circle. The first thing they're going to do is kind of read the text at the top of your presentation. They're going to capture and look at the image, and then they're going to kick back and listen to what you have to say. And this process will happen every slide change that you go through. So by each of these slides are roughly about a minute long as I'm presenting them. And so some are shorter, some are longer, but roughly about a minute, that's what I'm aiming for. So folks have time to take in all parts of the presentation. They can read what's there. I'm not giving them too much to read. The fact that they can read tremendously fast, is helpful, and they process that. Then they're, how does this image, they're mapping that image to their head, and then also narrating. And by the image and the narration, there's a balance on the verbal and visual channels. One piece that I want to add to this is talking about the back channel. And the back channel is this additional conversation that's happening with your audience. And your audience is out there taking notes. They're looking at computers. So if you're looking at your audience and you see everybody looking at their devices, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not paying attention. They may be involved in the back channel and sharing things, sharing conversation about what you're saying to the rest of the world. And you may actually get questions from outside the room into your presentation, using the back channel. So one of the things that I do on my presentation, this is also recommendations from Cliff Atkinson, is acknowledge the back channel at the very beginning. So on my first slide, I mentioned that this was Twitter friendly, and I had my hashtag available so that folks, if they wanted to use it, they could use my hashtag. And just letting folks know that I'm aware it's out there, and I encourage folks to use it. This is something Cliff Atkinson recommended, was putting in Twitter breaks into your presentation, giving folks an opportunity to maybe send something out during that time. I have not found it useful for me, but it's an idea that you may want to incorporate. The nice thing about the back channel is that it provides you feedback that people may not necessarily come up and tell you face to face, you know, what they thought of your presentation or ideas that resonated with them. But if you review the back channel, you know, you may be able to find out this information, ways that you can improve your presentation. You know, you may find that, you know, you have something that you were unaware of, and this would be information to help you just improve. So the back channel provides a great way to do that. So today we talked about why, you know, we should be cognizant of what's going on in the brain and how to help that, which would yield to better learning. How I go about building my presentations and strategies for better delivery. So, as I said, I got these from Cliff Atkinson. Tremendously good book, Beyond Bullet Points. I recommend it. He also has a book out called The Back Channel. And then Lynell, Burmark. This is a book on visual literacy and just a lot of just great concepts in there. But one piece of research that showed up in that book, it came from IBM, or 3M. And what they were finding is that reducing the amount of words, the amount of bullet points on a slide, and increasing the visual imagery of this increased learning 400%. So if you want to jack up learning, take your words off and focus on the imagery. So that's it for today, folks. Thanks for attending. Let me see if there's any questions. I didn't see any questions. Nope, no questions. So I may have been all by myself here, and that's fine. This will be recorded, and we'll get this back out to you. And so thanks for attending, and have just a wonderful day.